The first time Yaron Keller saw her, she was standing barefoot in the snow, yelling at a moose. He blinked, stunned, from behind the frosted window of his secluded cabin, coffee halfway to his lips. The woman was in pajamas, her dark curls flying everywhere as she waved a broom and shouted, "Go eat someone else's garden, you oversized deer." Yaron set the mug down slowly, watching her, unsure if she was brave, insane, or both. This wasn't what he came here for. He'd bought this cabin, miles from the nearest town, deep in the Colorado mountains, for one reason: silence. After selling his tech company for over $60 million, the last thing Yaron wanted was more boardrooms, camera flashes, or women pretending to like him while eyeing his bank account. He wanted peace. He wanted to breathe, and apparently he wanted to be neighbors with a woman who yelled at wildlife. Later that afternoon, curiosity got the better of him. He grabbed a coat and walked down the hill toward the small log house next door. Smoke curled from the chimney. There was a red truck in the driveway, older than both of them combined. As he approached, a dog barked once, then settled again. Then the front door opened. She stood there, now dressed in worn jeans and a thick sweater, a smudge of flour on her cheek. "You the guy who moved into the Keller place?" she asked, crossing her arms. "Yeah," Yaron said, surprised she knew the name. "Yaron Keller," she arched an eyebrow. "Jessamy Rhoades, you've been here 3 days and haven't said a word." "Thought maybe you were dead." "I was avoiding people," he admitted. "Well," Jessamy said, "bad luck. You moved next to the only person under 70 for 15 miles and I bake pies." Yaron laughed before he could stop it. "Do the pies come with more moose chasing?" "That moose has been eating my winter vegetables for 3 weeks," she said, her eyes sparkling. "I'm done being polite." There was something about her raw, real. Her smile wasn't practiced. Her eyes didn't scan him like she was calculating his worth. She was just herself, and for the first time in months, Yaron felt something settle in his chest. "Can I help with anything?" he asked. She narrowed her eyes. "You know how to chop firewood?" "Nope." "Well then," she said, a grin tugging at her mouth. "You're gonna learn." They fell into an odd rhythm after that. Every morning, Jessamy would wave to him from her porch. Sometimes she brought over baked goods, apple pie, cinnamon rolls, peach cobbler. Yaron tried to return the favor, burning 3 grilled cheese sandwiches in the process. One day she dropped a heavy box on his porch, knocked, and left before he could open the door. Inside was a pair of snowshoes and a note. "If you're gonna live in the mountains, you might as well see them." So he did. With her, they hiked. They built a fire pit between their cabins. She taught him how to spot animal tracks in the snow, and he taught her how to fix her old computer. They bickered, laughed, and slowly, Yaron stopped checking his phone. He didn't even notice when he missed a call from his lawyer. She never asked what he did for a living. She never asked why he lived alone, and he didn't offer. He wasn't ready to break whatever was forming between them. One night, after dinner at her place, she made chili. He brought wine. They sat on her back porch, watching the stars. Jessamy nudged him gently. "You never said why you moved out here." Yaron looked up at the sky. "Noise. I needed to get away from it." She was quiet for a minute. "People or pressure?" "Both," he said quietly. "Me too," she said. "I was a chef in Denver. My fiancé cheated on me with the wedding planner. I left and never looked back." He turned to look at her, surprised. She shrugged. "Everyone has something, but out here no one cares who you were, just who you are." Yaron nodded slowly. He wanted to tell her about the company, the constant headlines. The way women looked at him like he was a prize, not a person, but he didn't want to ruin it. A few days later, he found her standing in the snow outside his cabin. Her cheeks were flushed and she held something behind her back. "I made you something," she said. He stepped outside, confused. "What is it?" Jessamy pulled out a hand-knitted scarf, deep navy blue. "You always forget one." She wrapped it around his neck, her fingers brushing his throat. Yaron stilled, their eyes met. He could feel her breath in the cold air. He didn't think. He leaned forward and kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative. Then her hands curled into his coat and he pulled her tighter, the snow forgotten, the world gone quiet except for the pounding in his chest. When they finally pulled apart, she looked up at him, breathless. "I wasn't expecting that," she whispered. "Neither was I," he said, brushing a curl from her cheek. But he knew then he was in trouble because he'd come here for peace. And instead, he'd found her. The first storm of December rolled in without warning. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a gunmetal gray, and snow lashed the windows of Yaron's cabin in thick, wind-driven sheets. He stood in front of the fireplace, stacking wood while the flames cracked behind the mesh screen, when a knock sounded at the door sharp, urgent. He opened it to find Jessamy, bundled in a heavy coat, her hood soaked through and her cheeks ruddy from the cold. She looked up at him, eyes wide. "I think a tree came down on my chimney," she said, smokes backing into the house. "It's not safe." Without hesitation, Yaron stepped back and gestured her in. She didn't hesitate either. She dropped her boots by the door, stomped snow off her jeans, and peeled off her gloves with teeth-chattering fingers. "Let me get you a blanket," he said, already moving. "I brought cookies," she said, holding up a tin with a lopsided grin. They sat on the rug in front of the fireplace, wrapped in thick throws, the tin between them. The storm howled outside, but inside was warm, the air thick with cinnamon, wood smoke, and something else, something unspoken. Jessamy reached for a cookie, then paused. "You ever wonder if you were supposed to end up somewhere else?" Yaron leaned back on one elbow. "Like fate?" "No," she said, "just accidents that feel too perfect to be random." He looked at her for a long moment, her face lit by firelight, the wind moaning around the cabin. "You think this is an accident?" Jessamy shrugged. "I think I was running from something. And maybe I ran into something better." Silence settled between them, heavy and full. He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't hesitate. "I want to tell you something," he said, his voice low, "but it might change things. Try me. I sold a company last year, a tech company. Security software. I started it in college and sold it for a ridiculous amount of money." She blinked once. "How ridiculous are we talking? North of 60 million. Jessamy stared at him, unmoving. The fire popped behind them. "That's a lot of cookies," she said finally. He couldn't help laughing, a sound that felt unfamiliar and good. "That's not why I didn't tell you," he said. "I've had people treat me like a walking ATM. I didn't want that with you." Her expression softened. "I figured you had money. Nobody moves into that cabin unless they've got cash to burn. But I didn't care how much. I still don't." Yaron exhaled, the tension in his chest loosening. "I just didn't want to mess this up." "Then don't," she said simply. The storm raged on, but the space between them grew smaller. Her head found his shoulder. They sat like that until the fire burned low and the wind began to settle. That night she stayed, not out of need but choice. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world outside blanketed in untouched white. Jessamy stood at the window, arms crossed, watching the sunrise stain the snow in hues of rose and gold. Yaron came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist. She leaned back into him. "I have to check on my place," she said quietly. "If the chimney's cracked, I'll need to call someone in town." "I'll come with you." Inside her house, the damage was worse than expected. The fallen branch had punched straight through the chimney cap, and smoke stains streaked the ceiling. She stood in the middle of the room, staring at the mess. "I can't afford a full replacement right now. I'll have to get someone to patch it and hope it holds through January." Yaron didn't say anything. He knew better than to offer money outright not with her. Instead, he crouched down and examined the base of the chimney. "Let me at least look at the structure. If it's just the cap and flue, I might be able to rig a temporary fix." She gave him a skeptical glance. "You're good with tools?" "No," he admitted. "But I'm good at figuring things out." He spent the next 2 hours clambering up the roof and applying sealant, Jessamy handing him tools through the window. When he finally climbed back down, covered in soot and snow, she handed him a thermos of coffee and kissed his cheek. "You surprise me," she said. "Good or bad?" "Both. Mostly good." That evening, they sat in his living room again, this time with her sketchpad open. She had a pencil tucked behind her ear, and Yaron watched as she drew lines with quick, confident strokes. "What are you working on?" She held up the paper, a blueprint of a small cafe, cozy, inviting. "It's something I've been dreaming about, a bakery/breakfast place in town, but I'd need to lease space, get permits, equipment." "Why haven't you done it?" She looked down at the paper. "Because dreaming is free, opening a business isn't." Yaron studied her, the way her fingers tightened slightly around the edge. What if you had a partner? Her eyes flicked up. I've got resources, you've got talent. I don't want control, I just want to help you build something real. Jessamy's jaw tensed. I don't want to be someone you rescue. You're not, he said, voice level. You're someone I believe in. She searched his face for a long moment. Let me think about it, he nodded. Take all the time you need. But she didn't wait long. That night, as they stood on the porch watching the stars reappear, she reached for his hand. Maybe, she said, this wasn't an accident after all. Yaron hadn't meant to stay in the mountains past January. That was the agreement he'd made with himself when he signed the deed. 3 cold months of isolation. Time to recalibrate, then back to the city to figure out what came next. But February arrived with soft snowfall and long mornings tangled beside Jessamy, and he didn't pack a single box. Instead, he found himself combing through commercial listings in town, researching zoning permits, and learning more about restaurant-grade ovens than he ever thought he'd care to know. Jessamy hadn't said yes to his offer yet, but she hadn't said no either. Every day, her sketches grew more detailed. He noticed she'd started organizing them into folders labeled Interior Flow, Menu Ideas, and Branding. One morning, she invited him into town to meet someone from the Historical Society about a vacant corner building on Main Street. It had once been a post office, then a quilting shop, and now stood empty with ivy curling around the windows and faded paint peeling from the shutters. She wore a navy wool coat and leather gloves, her curls pinned back for once, revealing the slope of her neck as the wind caught her scarf. This is the one I've had my eye on, she said, unlocking the door with a borrowed key. It's old, but the bones are good. Yaron followed her inside, stepping over dusty floorboards and sunlight filtering through cracked panes. You see a bakery here? He asked. I see a bakery, a breakfast counter, and maybe a little nook with shelves of local jams and cookbooks, she said, turning slowly in the space. I want it to feel like home. He watched her move through the room, already rearranging walls in her head, and felt something shift in his chest. Later that night, as they sat in the cab of her truck, engine idling outside his place, she stared at the steering wheel. I'm scared, she said quietly. This dream, it's big, and if it fails, it'll be my name on the door. Then we make sure it doesn't fail, he said. Not by throwing money at it, but by doing it right, step by step. She looked at him, eyes unreadable. You'd really do all this with me? Even if it means staying longer than you planned. I'm not counting days anymore, Jess. She leaned toward him then, not for a kiss, but to rest her forehead against his. Okay, she whispered. Let's build something. The next few weeks passed in a blur of planning meetings and taste tests. Jessamy's energy was electric. She sourced local maple syrup, reconnected with farmers, and designed a menu that made Yaron rethink everything he thought he knew about breakfast. He handled the legal side, negotiating the lease, setting up the LLC, and helping her navigate the permit maze with the town council. One afternoon, after a long meeting with a health inspector, they stopped by a boutique hardware store for tile samples. As she flipped through a display book of backsplash options, Yaron caught a glimpse of a small group of men in suits walking past the window, people he recognized. Investors. From his old life, he ducked slightly, turning his face. Jessamy glanced over. You okay? He nodded. Yeah. Just thought I saw someone I used to know. He didn't elaborate. He didn't want that world bleeding into this one. But later that night, as they closed up after a paint consultation in the new space, he saw the black SUV parked across from the bakery. It wasn't local. The man leaning against it wasn't either. Yaron, the man called. Been a while. Jessamy stopped beside him, confused. Yaron stepped forward. What are you doing here, Callum? Callum Hart was one of his former board members, sharp-eyed, all smiles, and absolutely incapable of subtlety. Thought I'd take a drive. Didn't expect to find our boy hiding out in flannel and sawdust. I'm not hiding. Sure, just disappearing for 6 months with no explanation and ghosting every investor. That's not hiding at all. Jessamy stiffened beside him. I'll talk to you later, Yaron said firmly. Alone. Callum's gaze flicked to Jessamy, then back. You've changed. Yaron didn't answer. He waited until Callum drove off before turning to her. I should have told you more, he said slowly. When I sold the company, I walked away from more than just the job. I walked away from everyone who wanted a piece of me. Jessamy folded her arms, not in anger but unease. And now they've found you. I'll deal with it. I don't want you caught in the middle. This is your life, Yaron. If I'm going to be part of it, I don't want the edited version, he exhaled, shoulders heavy. I didn't plan for any of this, he admitted. Not you, not the bakery, not wanting to stay. Well, none of us planned for anything, she said. We just showed up and kept going, he reached for her hand. Do you still want to build this with me? I do. But I need to know you're staying because you want to, not because you're afraid to face what's behind you. I'm staying because I finally found something real. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Then we keep building. But the next morning, he found a letter tucked under his windshield wiper. One sentence, typed. Your mountain fairy tale doesn't belong to you. He didn't tell Jessamy, not yet. Yaron stood in the center of the nearly finished bakery, the scent of fresh paint still clinging to the air and the soft hum of new refrigeration units filling the quiet. Morning light spilled through the front windows, warming the counters. Jessamy had chosen reclaimed wood from a nearby barn, each plank worn and full of character. It was exactly what she'd wanted, something honest, something with history. He held the letter in his hand, the one he'd found on his windshield days ago, its single sentence still ringing in the back of his mind. He hadn't told her, not when her eyes were shining over the first delivery of baking racks. Not when she brought in a box of mismatched ceramic mugs from her old kitchen and arranged them behind the counter like she was laying down roots. He told himself it didn't matter, that whoever left the note was just trying to rattle him. But the weight of it had lodged somewhere in his chest, dull and heavy. Morning. Jessamy's voice pulled him back. She entered through the side door, brushing snow off her sleeves and carrying a paper bag that she set on the prep table. Blueberries, she said. A farmer in Ridgelake had some flash frozen from last fall. Thought we could test the glaze on that lemon loaf. He nodded, folding the letter and slipping it into his back pocket. You think we'll be ready by next weekend? If the ovens pass their inspection tomorrow, yes. I've already got a few pre-orders for pies. He walked over, unrolling the top of the bag and inspecting the berries. You're really doing this? We're doing this, she corrected. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing the inside of her wrist. I've never built anything that felt like it mattered until now. Jessamy looked at him carefully, her voice quieter. Then why do you look like you're somewhere else half the time? He didn't answer right away. She waited. There's something I didn't tell you, he said finally. A few days ago, I found a note, no name, just a message. Her expression didn't change, but her posture did, arms folding, gaze narrowing. What did it say? Just one sentence. That this, he gestured around the bakery, doesn't belong to me. Jessamy didn't flinch, didn't ask for the paper. Do you think it was from someone you used to work with? Maybe. Or someone who thinks I abandoned the business world and should have stayed in my lane. I don't know. She leaned back against the counter. And you didn't tell me because? Because I didn't want it to touch this. You. Us, Jessamy exhaled slowly. You can't protect me by keeping me in the dark. I know. She pushed off the counter and walked toward him. We made something here, not just a bakery, a life. If someone thinks they can scare you out of it, they don't know you at all. I'm not scared, he said. But I am angry, because this is the first time I've felt like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. She stepped closer until they were inches apart. Then fight for it. The next morning, Yaron drove into Denver. He hadn't been back since the sale. The city's skyline was familiar but distant now, like a photo from another life. He parked outside a high-rise office tower, the kind he used to walk into every day without thinking. This time, his steps were slower, more deliberate. He took the elevator to the 12th floor, walked past a receptionist who didn't recognize him, and stepped into a boardroom where Callum Hart sat with two other men in dark suits and practiced smiles. I got your message, Yaron said, tossing the folded note onto the table. Callum didn't look surprised. I figured you'd come eventually. You've made your point, now make it clearly. Callum leaned back, folding his hands. You walked away from a company that's still using your name. People are asking questions. Investors are getting nervous. You disappear, then pop up in the mountains funding a bakery with some local woman. Her name is Jessamy, and this bakery isn't some vanity project, it's hers. I just helped make it possible. You didn't sign a non-compete, you're still a public face. I'm not coming back. I'm not launching anything, I'm not competing with anyone, I'm starting over. You always were sentimental, Callum said, but if you want to stay out of the spotlight, stop making headlines. I'm not making headlines, Yaron said, voice even. You are. He turned and left without waiting for a response. The drive back was quiet, no music, no calls. Just the sound of tires moving over salt-dusted roads and the growing need to get home. When he pulled up in front of the bakery, the windows were glowing. Inside, Jessamy stood at the counter, rolling out dough. The place smelled like citrus and butter, and she was laughing at something a Boy Scout troop leader had said while placing an order for next Saturday's community breakfast. Yaron waited until the customer left before stepping inside. She looked up, flour on her cheek, and something in her expression shifted. You went to the city. I needed to end something. She wiped her hands on a towel, and, it's done, they won't bother us again. Jessamy walked around the counter and stood in front of him. You sure? He nodded. I chose this, all of it. I don't care who doesn't understand it. She searched his face, then reached up and touched his jaw. Good, because I can't do this halfway, Yaron. I'm all in or not at all. He pulled her into his arms, holding her there in the warm, flower-scented light. I'm all in. I want this life. I want you. A week later, on opening day, the bakery buzzed with people. Locals filled the tables, complimenting the pastries, pointing out the custom shelves Jessamy had built from salvaged window frames. Children pressed their noses to the glass display, and someone played guitar on the sidewalk. Yaron brought out a fresh tray of croissants just as Jessamy emerged from the kitchen. He caught her elbow gently, drawing her aside. I have something for you. She raised an eyebrow. Unless it's a new pastry mixer, it'll have to wait. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a deed, her name, sole owner of the bakery. I wanted to help you build it, he said, voice quiet, but it's yours, you built this. Her hands trembled as she held the paper. Why now? Because I love you, and I want you to know I'm not just here to build things, I'm here to stay. Jessamy looked at him, eyes full and shining. You really want to stay with you, he said. Always. She laughed, then kissed him right there in front of the line of waiting customers, flour on her apron, music drifting through the open door. Outside, the mountains stood quiet and steady. Inside, love had found its place. The snow had melted into slush by the time the first spring rains came. The roads shimmered with runoff from the mountains, and wild crocuses bloomed defiantly through patches of frost-beaten earth. Inside the bakery, the soft rattle of utensils in ceramic mugs, the scent of orange zest scones, and the low hum of conversation filled the space like a heartbeat. The town had claimed it as their own, and Jessamy had become something of a morning ritual for locals, a quiet constant in a place where life moved slowly and with purpose. Yaron stood at the back counter, sleeves rolled to his elbows as he organized receipts into two separate folders: expenses and incoming orders. The bakery was breaking even faster than they'd anticipated, and the small breakfast menu Jessamy had crafted was drawing people from surrounding towns. He'd started to become familiar with faces he never thought he'd know. People who smiled without expectation, who cared more about the flakiness of a crust than the number in his bank account. Jessamy emerged from the walk-in pantry, her curls pulled back with a pencil stuck through them and a list of inventory scribbled on her forearm. You've got flour on your eyelid, he said, gesturing. She swiped at it with the back of her hand, missing entirely. Better, worse, she laughed and shrugged. Occupational hazard. He leaned forward and gently brushed the smudge away, his fingers lingering a second longer than necessary. She didn't move. I got a call this morning, she said, her voice quieter. From the State Culinary Board, he straightened slightly. Everything okay? They want me to speak at a conference in Denver, a panel on independently owned rural bakeries. I guess someone submitted our story. He tilted his head. Do you want to do it? She hesitated. I don't know. It's not like I'm looking for publicity, but it might help give others the guts to try. Then say yes, I'll be there with you. She reached for his hand and squeezed. You're not worried about being recognized. I'm not hiding anymore. Let them see me building something better than whatever I left behind. She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned in and rested her forehead against his. You're better at this than you think. Later that week, they drove into the city. It was the first time Jessamy had returned since she left her old life. The skyline greeted them with its usual mix of glass and steel, but it didn't feel like it used to, not to either of them. The conference was held in a restored warehouse-turned-event space, full of independent food entrepreneurs and culinary students looking for more than just recipes. Jessamy spoke with quiet confidence, sharing their journey from neighbors to partners, and how building something meaningful had nothing to do with location and everything to do with intention. Afterward, a woman with streaks of gray in her braid approached Jessamy with tears in her eyes and said, "You made me believe it's not too late to start over." Yaron watched her take that in how her words had moved someone, and he felt it again, that quiet certainty that he hadn't just fallen for her. He'd found the exact person who made him want to become someone better. That night, they stayed in a small hotel suite overlooking the river. Jessamy stood by the window, her back to him, the city lights reflecting in the glass. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You miss it?" he asked. She shook her head. "I miss what I thought it was, but I don't miss who I was when I lived here." He kissed the side of her neck. "I love who you are now." She turned in his arms. "I love who you are now, too." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught. "I wasn't sure when the right time would be," he said. "But I realized there isn't one. There's just us. Here, now." He opened the box. Inside was a ring simple gold with a single sapphire surrounded by a halo of tiny diamonds. "I don't want to be your business partner and your boyfriend," he said. "I want to be the man who wakes up beside you every day and builds a life with you that feels like ours." "Will you marry me?" Jessamy stared at him, her eyes shining with something more than surprise. "You're going to have to learn how to fold dish towels properly," she whispered, her voice thick. "I'll take a class. You're going to have to eat burnt crusts without pretending they taste fine." "I already do," she laughed, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Then yes, Yaron. I'll marry you." They returned to the mountains the next day, the bakery humming along in their absence thanks to the part-time staff they'd trained together. Word spread quickly someone had seen the ring, and by the end of the week, there were 3 congratulatory pies left at their doorstep. They didn't want a big wedding. Just a ceremony in the meadow behind the bakery, where the land opened into sky and the wildflowers bloomed without permission. Jessamy wore a dress she'd found in a vintage shop in Boulder, and Yaron wore a navy suit that still had tags from the boutique she dragged him into during their Denver trip. Their vows weren't long or poetic, but they were real. "I didn't just fall in love with you," she said. "I chose you. Every day, in flour and firewood and frozen pipes, and I always will." "I never believed in fate," he said. "But then you yelled at a moose in the snow, and everything changed." They kissed as the breeze lifted her curls and the mountains stood behind them like witnesses. After the wedding, they didn't go far. Just up the ridge where Yaron surprised her with a small glass greenhouse he'd commissioned from a local builder. Inside were lemon trees, wild herbs, and a table for 2. "I thought we could grow the flavors before we bake them," he said, leading her inside. She turned to him, eyes wide. "You built this for me?" "I built it for us." They spent that night under the stars, wrapped in each other, with the scent of basil and lavender drifting through the air and the soft sound of crickets singing the day to sleep. And in the quiet where everything real lived, they built a life that didn't need anything else. Not headlines, not proving themselves, just love, steady and certain, like the mountains that first brought them together.